A group of millionaire businessmen made a cruel bet after a business meeting. Whoever lost would have to give a homeless girl a fake credit card and watch her humiliation when she tried to buy something. When he lost the bet, he reluctantly approached the 7-year-old sitting on the sidewalk and told her she could buy anything she wanted with that card. The girl's eyes sparkled with genuine hope, and she asked 3 times if it was really true, as if she couldn't believe such luck. At the market, surrounded by his wealthy friends waiting to laugh, she walked through the aisles full of options and chose only one simple thing that broke his heart. The afternoon sun cast a golden sheen across the glass and steel skyscrapers of Manhattan, reflecting the city's opulence and the euphoria bubbling on the rooftop of the most exclusive bar in Midtown. Arthur Sterling raised his crystal glass, the amber liquid dancing within, and clinked it against those of his partners, Rick and Greg. The ringing sound was muffled by their loud, confident laughter, the echo of a successfully closed deal that would add several more $1 million to each of their already vast fortunes. At 35, Arthur was the personification of success. His name was synonymous with the Midas touch on Wall Street, turning every investment into pure gold. He lived in a world of profitability charts, rising dividends, and a cash flow that seemed inexhaustible. But beneath the facade of a ruthless billionaire lay a ravenous, almost childlike need to be admired by those he considered his peers. It was this need that made him vulnerable to the most foolish of wagers. Rick, with a mischievous grin, seized the moment. "A toast to the profits," he said, "and to celebrate, a little bet to liven up the afternoon." Arthur felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. He never turned down a challenge. The bet was simple, a round of a quick card game. The loser would have to complete a dare chosen by the others. Luck, which so favored him on the stock market, abandoned him then. He lost. Rick and Greg erupted in laughter. From the height of the terrace, Rick pointed to the street corner far below. Sitting on a piece of cardboard, huddled against the wall of a building, was a little girl, small, with tangled hair and faded clothes. "There it is," Rick said, his eyes glinting with cruelty. "You're going to go down there, give her this card." He pulled a perfect-looking fake credit card from his wallet, one he used for pranks, "and tell her she can buy whatever she wants, whatever her heart desires." The plan was to film the child's humiliation at the store's checkout and laugh about it later. Arthur felt a slight hesitation, a shadow of discomfort, but the mocking gaze of his friends propelled him forward. To step down from his pedestal, to dirty his expensive shoes on the sidewalk, all to maintain his image as a fearless, fun-loving man. He took the card, adjusted his designer suit, and went down. With every step he took toward the girl, the city noise seemed to swell, drowning out the voice of his conscience. He crouched in front of her, the scent of his expensive lavender cologne contrasting with the street dust. "Hello," he said, in the smooth voice he used to close deals. This is for you." He held out the gleaming plastic card. The girl, who couldn't have been more than 7, looked first at the card, then at him, with enormous, suspicious eyes. "What's this?" she whispered. "It's a magic card," Arthur lied, forcing a smile. "You can go to that store over there and buy anything you want." He felt a knot form in his throat, but he pushed on. The girl took the card with trembling fingers, as if holding something sacred, and then she looked at him, and Arthur saw something he didn't expect. It wasn't greed nor suspicion. It was hope, pure, crystalline, a light so intense it seemed to burn. Her deep brown eyes shone with a force that hit him like a punch to the gut. For an instant, the world around him disappeared. The laughter of his friends on the rooftop, the roar of the traffic, the importance of his own ego, it all dissolved before that gaze. He felt a sharp, unfamiliar pang, a discomfort that refused to be ignored. He stood up abruptly, turning his back so he wouldn't have to face those eyes another second, but the image was already seared into his mind, an open wound in his carefully constructed indifference. Arthur turned sharply, his heart hammering against his ribs in a way he hadn't felt since his first major trade on the stock exchange. He tried to recompose his mask of indifference, of superiority. As he walked back toward the building entrance where his friends were waiting, the plan was simple: go up, get another drink, and laugh at the scene that would unfold. But the image of those brown eyes, filled with an almost painful hope, haunted him. It was a strange feeling, like a dissonance in a perfectly orchestrated symphony. He, a multi-millionaire who measured the world in assets and liabilities, felt destabilized by a child who owned nothing. He stopped and, against his will, looked back. The girl, whom he now saw was named Leah, as an older boy called her name while passing by, didn't run to the glittering toy store on the other corner, nor to the candy shop with its colorful window display. She stood up, smoothed her threadbare dress, and with the fake card clutched in one hand, walked with an almost solemn hesitation toward the small grocery store across the street. A pang of curiosity, mixed with a growing sense of dread, made him stop. Why the grocery store? His friends on the rooftop were surely wondering the same thing, the joke taking an unexpected turn. Leah paused on the curb, right in front of him, before crossing. She looked at him, her head tilted, as if trying to decipher a complex puzzle. "Mister," she began, her voice so low it was barely audible above the traffic. "Is it really real? Can I buy anything?" The first question. Arthur swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. "Of course, kid, whatever you want," he replied, his voice harsher than he intended. He wanted her to just go, for the farce to be over. But she didn't move. Her small, bare feet seemed glued to the pavement. She looked at the glass door of the grocery store, then back at him. Really anything, with no money limit. The second question. Her innocence was a sharp knife. She wasn't being greedy, she was being careful, as if fearing this fragile dream could shatter at the slightest touch. That question about a money limit coming from her, who had probably never had enough for a single decent meal, sounded like an accusation. All his fortune, all his possessions, suddenly seemed vulgar. "Yes, no limit. Now go," he said, almost pleading. His patience, a virtue he wielded as a weapon in business, was wearing thin. He just wanted the familiar comfort of his friends. Cynicism. Leah took a step toward the street but stopped one last time. She turned to him, and the setting sun illuminated her small, serious face. Her eyes met his, and the disarming purity he had seen before was now mixed with a gravity that didn't belong to a child, even something very, very important. The third question. Those words hit him with the force of a wave. Very important. What could be important to her? To him, important was the closing bell, the dollar's exchange rate, the return on his investments. Her question exposed the futility of his world in a way no financial analysis ever could. What was he doing here? For a moment, the bet, his friends, his reputation, it all lost meaning. He just nodded, unable to form a word. Satisfied with the silent answer, Leah finally crossed the street, disappearing inside the grocery store. Arthur stood frozen on the sidewalk, the sound of horns and passers-by becoming a distant hum. The script for the joke was lost. He was no longer the master of the situation. He was completely adrift, pulled by an invisible current toward that glass door, with an inexplicable need to discover what, for that little girl, was the most important thing in the world. An irrational impulse, stronger than pride and the fear of ridicule, forced Arthur's feet to move. He crossed the street, his heart beating out of sync, and pushed open the glass door of the grocery store. The cold air conditioning was a shock against his skin, flushed from the sun and anxiety. The smell of fresh bread and cleaning products, so common to most people, was for him the scent of a forgotten world, a place he hadn't visited in years, since his money and position had elevated him to a plane where such mundane tasks were delegated to others. His friends, high above, must be baffled, perhaps even laughing at his sudden, strange curiosity. To hell with them. In that moment, their approval seemed insignificant, a distant echo of a life that was beginning to feel hollow. He spotted Leah near the produce section. She wasn't looking at the treats, not lingering by the shelves of cookies or chips. Her small shoulders were tense, her posture that of someone on a mission of extreme importance. She moved with a purpose that Arthur, with all his capital and multi-million-dollar deals, rarely felt. He followed her at a distance, hiding behind a pyramid of canned goods, feeling like an intruder, a spy in his own cruel game. What was she looking for so intently? The question echoed in his mind, as loud as the hum of the refrigerators. The girl passed the toy aisle, an explosion of color and promises of joy. She didn't even turn her head. She ignored the dolls, the toy cars, the video games. Arthur frowned, his confusion growing. The bet was about human greed, about proving that everyone, even an innocent child, would succumb to the temptation of unlimited wealth. But Leah was breaking all the rules of his cynical game. She didn't want toys. She didn't want candy. She didn't want anything a child would normally desire with all their might. Finally, she stopped. She stood before the large dairy refrigerators, their fogged glass doors hiding rows upon rows of products. With a visible effort, she stood on her tiptoes, her arm stretched to its maximum. Her small, thin hand passed over the yogurt cups, the expensive cheeses, the creamy puddings. And then she grabbed her prize. It wasn't a chocolate cake, nor a pint of imported ice cream. It was a simple, anonymous, and cold bottle of milk. Just that. She hugged the bottle to her chest as if it were the world's most precious treasure, a smile of pure relief illuminating her face. A deafening silence took over Arthur's mind. The world seemed to stop spinning. Milk, the answer to anything, even something very, very important, was milk. All his arrogance, all his certainty about human nature crumbled in an instant. He felt hollow, stripped of something he didn't even know he had. He watched, paralyzed, as Leah walked proudly to the checkout counter. She placed the bottle on the counter and, with the solemnity of someone sealing a major deal, handed the fake credit card to the cashier. The woman, with a tired look, took the card and swiped it through the machine. Arthur held his breath. He knew what was coming, but the anticipation was now not of amusement, but of pure dread. The machine emitted a sharp, electronic beep, a sound that sliced through the market's air. A red light blinked insistently. The cashier looked at the screen, then at the little girl, her face a mixture of pity and embarrassment. "I'm sorry, sweetie," she said, her voice soft, but the words fell like stones. "This card has been declined." The word declined hung in the air, as cold and sharp as the machine's beep. For Arthur, who lived in a universe where cash flow was king and a declined payment was an abstract concept applied to others, the sound was more humiliating than any loss on the stock market. But the humiliation wasn't his, or at least it wasn't supposed to be. The target was the girl. However, as he saw the light in Leah's eyes extinguish like a candle in a gale, he felt the shame ricochet and hit him squarely. The smile of relief she had when she picked up the milk dissolved, replaced by a mask of confusion, and then a silent resignation that was infinitely more devastating than tears. She didn't throw a tantrum, didn't whimper. She just lowered her head, her small shoulders slumping in defeat. "It's okay," she whispered to the cashier, her voice barely audible. "Sorry to bother you." She turned to leave, leaving the bottle of milk, her treasure, behind on the counter. In that instant, Arthur's universe shattered. He heard, in his mind, the cruel laughter of Rick and Greg echoing from the rooftop. He imagined them toasting the success of their joke, celebrating the small tragedy they had orchestrated. The sound, which once represented camaraderie and power, now made him nauseous. His entire net worth, his assets, the fortune accumulated over years of ruthless business, seemed to turn to dust. What good was a financial empire if he used his power to crush a child's hope for a bottle of milk? The question, why the milk, returned with full force, and with it, an overwhelming certainty began to form in his mind. That milk wasn't for her. That mission, that seriousness, was not for a simple childish whim. There was something more, something he, in his frivolity, had failed to see. Without thinking, he moved. He left his hiding spot behind the canned goods and strode to the checkout, the sound of his expensive shoes echoing on the linoleum floor. "Wait," he said, his voice hoarse. Leah stopped, turning with frightened eyes. The few people in line stared at him, recognizing the famous businessman. The cashier's eyes widened. Arthur ignored them all. His focus was only on the bottle of milk and the girl who had abandoned it. He pulled his wallet from the inner pocket of his jacket, the soft leather a stark contrast to the fake plastic card still on the counter. He took out his personal credit card, a piece of black metal with no known limit, and handed it to the cashier. "I run this," he ordered, "and add bread, cheese, and some fruit. The best you have." The stunned cashier obeyed in silence. As she scanned the items, Arthur crouched again in front of Leah. This time, there was no arrogance in his gesture, only a heavy regret. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words came out with a sincerity that surprised him. There was a mistake with the other card. Leah just watched him, her eyes huge and unreadable. Clutching the hem of her dress, she didn't understand the initial cruelty, and now she didn't understand the sudden kindness. The payment was approved instantly. Arthur took the bag, feeling the comforting weight of the milk bottle inside. He handed it to Leah. "This is yours." She hesitated for a second before taking the bag with both hands, as if afraid this too was an illusion. As he walked out of the store, his phone started vibrating in his pocket. The name Rick glowed on the screen. He silenced it without looking. High up on the rooftop, he could see the silhouettes of his friends gesticulating, probably confused and angry. He didn't care. He turned his back on the building, on the bar, on the life he knew, and began to follow the girl, who was now walking hurriedly, clutching her bag as if her life depended on it. And Arthur felt that, somehow, his did too. The girl walked quickly, with the determination of someone who knows the way by heart and is in a hurry to reach their destination. Arthur followed at a respectful distance, feeling like a complete stranger in his own city. He, who knew every shortcut to the financial district and every five-star restaurant, now found himself winding through streets he normally only saw through the tinted window of his car. The scent of jasmine from manicured gardens gave way to the odor of dampness and exhaust from narrow alleys. The imposing architecture of corporate towers was replaced by peeling facades and broken windows. He was crossing an invisible border, leaving his world of wealth and entering a territory of need. Every step he took was a step away from his comfort zone. People looked at him with curiosity and suspicion. A man in an Italian suit, shining shoes, and a gold watch did not belong here. He ignored the stares, his focus entirely on Leah and the bag she carried. The question about the importance of the milk continued to resonate in his head, now with a tone of urgency. With every block, the answer seemed to become clearer and at the same time more painful. Finally, Leah stopped. She ducked into a dark alley between two abandoned buildings, a place Arthur would never have noticed. He hesitated for a moment, prudence warring with the need to understand. The awareness of his valuable possessions, the risk of walking into a place like this, assailed him. But the image of disappointment on the girl's face was stronger. He took a deep breath and entered the alley. At the back of the narrow corridor, sheltered by stacked cardboard boxes, was a small, makeshift shelter. A stained old mattress covered by a thin sheet served as a bed. Sitting there, huddled and shivering under a worn blanket, was a boy, a little younger than Leah, maybe 5 years old. His face was pale, his lips chapped, and a cold sweat glistened on his forehead. He coughed, a dry, weak sound that seemed to tear through the alley's silence. Leah ran to him, kneeling by his side. "I got it, Peter, I got it," she whispered, her voice filled with desperate triumph. She opened the bag and took out the bottle of milk with the care of someone handling precious medicine. With the help of a cracked plastic cup, she poured the white liquid and brought it to her brother's lips. The boy drank eagerly, his eyes closed, and a little color seemed to return to his face. Arthur stood frozen at the entrance of the alley, his body rigid, the air trapped in his lungs. The scene before him was a blow to his soul. Leah's deal, her very important mission, was not to satisfy a whim, but to care for her sick brother. That milk wasn't a luxury, it was a vital necessity. The humiliation he felt in the store transformed into something much deeper, a visceral self-loathing. The bet, the laughter, the planned cruelty, all of it was designed to break the spirit of a child who was fighting, with a courage he had never known, to save her brother. His phone vibrated again. This time it was Greg. He answered, anger simmering beneath his skin. "Arthur, where the hell did you go? We were ready for the punchline. You ruined the best part." Greg's voice sounded irritated and mocking on the other end. Arthur looked at the two children huddled on the mattress, at the half-empty bottle of milk, at the silent dignity in this scene of misery. The futility and rot of his social circle had never seemed so clear. "I'm busy," he said, his voice as cold as steel. "Don't call me again." He hung up before Greg could respond and shoved the phone in his pocket, the gesture symbolizing a rupture. He was no longer one of them. In that foul-smelling alley, witnessing an act of pure, desperate love, Arthur Sterling, the billionaire, felt that all his money, his entire fortune, was worthless. He had lost the bet, but in a way no one could have predicted. He had bet on malice and found goodness. And that discovery left him completely, irredeemably broken. The break with his past was as sudden and violent as hanging up on Greg. Arthur felt a vacuum open where the security of belonging to that exclusive group, that financial elite, had once been. For an instant, the fear of loneliness, of ostracism, threatened him. But then he looked again at Leah and Peter, and the fear turned into determination. He had spent his entire life building a fortune, accumulating assets, thinking only of profit and dividends. Now, before these two children, he realized his greatest liability was his own empty soul. He took a step into the alley, the sound of his shoes on the dirty ground announcing his presence. Leah spun around, startled, and instinctively moved in front of her brother, like a small lioness protecting her cub. Her eyes, which had once shone with hope, were now filled with suspicion. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice trembling but firm. Arthur held up his hands in a gesture of peace. I just want to help," he said, the words sounding inadequate, almost absurd, in his own mouth. Helping was something he did through anonymous donations for tax deductions. Not personally, not here, in this place forgotten by God and men. Leah studied him for a long moment, her small, serious face trying to gauge the intentions of this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere. First with a false promise, and then with an inexplicable generosity. "We don't need your help," she said, with a pride that contrasted painfully with her vulnerability. She was a fierce guardian of her small world, a world of suffering that she somehow managed to navigate. Her refusal hit him harder than any failed negotiation. He was used to getting what he wanted, to using his money and influence to open doors. But here, his power was useless. "Your brother seems sick," Arthur insisted, his voice gentler. "He needs a doctor, a warm place to stay." Peter began to cough again, a sound that echoed through the alley and seemed to rip a piece out of Arthur's heart. Leah turned to soothe her brother, stroking his forehead. When she looked back at Arthur, there was a crack in her armor of pride. "We don't have money for a doctor," she admitted, her voice low. And we have nowhere to go." The confession was a whisper, but to Arthur, it was a scream. He remembered the futile arguments with his friends about which private island to buy for vacation, about the boredom of having access to everything. The injustice of the world presented itself to him, raw and brutal. He had to do something, not for charity, not to clear his conscience, but because, for the first time in a long time, he felt it was the only right thing to do. He took out his phone, but not to call his friends. He looked for his private doctor's contact. Before he could dial, the sound of loud voices and laughter approached the alley's entrance. "I told you he'd be around here, meddling where he doesn't belong." It was Rick's voice, laced with contempt. Arthur turned and saw his two, now former friends, standing at the entrance, their faces contorted in a mix of mockery and anger. "What's this, Arthur? Playing social worker now?" Greg jeered, pointing his phone to film the scene. "Our great investor, the market genius, playing the good Samaritan with this." Greg's gaze swept the alley with disgust. Their presence here, in this almost sacred space of survival, felt like a profanation to Arthur. The anger he had felt on the phone returned with full force. "Get out of here," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Rick laughed. "And spoil the show? No way. We just came to give you a message. The guys at the club are finding your attitude very strange. They're saying you've lost your edge, that you're getting soft. That's not good for business, my friend. Reputation is everything." The message was a veiled threat. His social circle, the same one that applauded his ruthlessness in business, now condemned him for an act of humanity. They were trying to pull him back, using the only language they knew, the fear of loss, of damage. The choice was clear. On one side, the world he had built, his fortune, his status. On the other, two helpless children in an alley. He looked at Leah, who was watching the scene with terrified eyes, clinging to her brother. "The decision wasn't difficult," I said. Arthur repeated, taking a step forward, placing himself between the men and the children. "To get out. Now." The narrow alley suddenly seemed too small to contain the tension emanating from the three men. Rick and Greg, used to seeing Arthur as an equal, a predator at the top of the corporate food chain, were caught off guard by the ferocity in his eyes. It was the same intensity he used to destroy competitors or close hostile takeovers, but now it was directed at them. For an instant, the disdain on their faces faltered, replaced by genuine disbelief. They couldn't comprehend the transformation. The Arthur they knew would sacrifice anything for a good deal, for a bump in his net worth. This man, defending two street kids, was a complete stranger. "What is your problem, Arthur?" Rick finally said, trying to regain his composure and air of superiority. "It's just a joke. You always loved our jokes. You're not going to let a little sentimental slip-up affect our investments, are you? We have the meeting with the Japanese investors next week. You need to be focused." The mention of business, of investments, was the anchor Rick used to try to pull him back to their reality, but the anchor found no purchase. Arthur's world had shifted on its axis. He glanced over his shoulder at Leah and Peter. The boy was trembling, not just from fever, but from fear. That trembling was more real and urgent than any fluctuation on the stock market. Their joke had caused this. Their cruel frivolity had a face, and it was the pale face of a sick child. "There are no more our investments," Arthur declared, each word cutting the air like a shard of glass. "The partnership is dissolved. Consider this my notice." The shock on Rick and Greg's faces was almost comical. They stared at him as if he had just announced the earth was flat. Their partnership was one of the most profitable in the city, a money-making machine that seemed unstoppable. To dissolve it over homeless kids, it was inconceivable. "You're insane," Greg stammered, lowering his phone. "You're throwing away a fortune, years of work." "Why?" "Because I finally realized what we've become," Arthur answered, his voice heavy with a weight he hadn't known he carried. "We don't build anything. We just accumulate. And in the process, we've lost any trace of humanity. I don't want to be a part of it anymore." He turned his back on them, a final act of dismissal, and walked back to the children. He knelt beside Leah, completely ignoring the presence of the other two men. "Don't worry," he said to her, his voice now gentle. "They're leaving. I'm going to get you out of here." Rick, humiliated and furious, took a step forward. "You will regret this, Arthur. We made you, and we can destroy you. The market doesn't forgive weakness." The threat hung in the air, but Arthur didn't even turn around. His attention was on Peter, who seemed to be growing weaker. He took out his phone and, this time, completed the call to his doctor. "Dr. Evans, it's Arthur Sterling. I need you. I have an emergency with 2 children. Yes, now. Send a private ambulance to the address I'm about to give you and prepare the best room at the hospital. No questions asked. The bill is on me." Upon hearing the word ambulance, Leah flinched. Her world, built on distrust and abandonment, didn't know how to process this kind of help. But seeing the calm authority in Arthur's voice, a small flame of trust began to sprout amidst her fear. Across the alley, Rick and Greg looked at each other. The joke had turned into a monumental disaster. Arthur's break was not just personal, it would have catastrophic financial repercussions. The prank, meant to humiliate an anonymous girl, had just imploded their empire. They turned and walked out of the alley in silence, no longer with the arrogance of winners, but with the dark fury of the betrayed. The war was declared. Arthur, however, wasn't thinking about the war. He took off his expensive jacket and used it to cover Peter's shoulders, offering a little warmth. In that simple gesture, a definitive turning point occurred. He was no longer Arthur Sterling, the billionaire. He was just Arthur, a man trying to fix a terrible mistake, a mistake that would lead him down a path he could never have imagined. The sound of the siren, distant at first, grew until it became a shrill wail that ricocheted off the alley walls. Red and white lights flashed intermittently, painting the scene of misery with strokes of urgency and panic. Leah shrank back, pulling Arthur's jacket higher on her brother's shoulders, as if she could shield him from the world invading their refuge. When 2 uniformed paramedics entered the alley with a stretcher, her fear turned to terror. "No!" she cried, her voice thin and shrill. "Leave him alone. He didn't do anything." She stood in front of Peter, arms outstretched, a diminutive warrior defending her kingdom. Arthur, who was used to commanding boardrooms with a single glance, felt completely unprepared to handle a child's panic. He knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Leah, it's okay," he said, his voice calm and steady. "They're not going to hurt him. They're my friends. They're going to take him to a place where he can get better." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears and suspicion. "You promised you could buy anything," she whispered, the memory of betrayal still fresh. Was this real? The question struck him like a dagger. The currency of trust was something he had devalued, and now he desperately needed to earn it back. "This is real," he promised, looking directly into her eyes. "I swear." The sincerity in his voice seemed to break through her barriers. Reluctantly, she stepped aside, allowing the paramedics to reach Peter. The ride to the hospital was a blur of lights and sounds. Inside the ambulance, Leah refused to let go of her brother's hand, even after he was connected to monitors that beeped rhythmically. Arthur sat across from them, feeling like an intruder. He observed the state-of-the-art medical equipment, the efficient care, and thought of the cost. To him, it was just another transaction, a sum debited from his vast fortune. To these children, it was either a miracle or a nightmare, and they didn't yet know which. At the private hospital, the contrast was even starker. The lobby was silent and luxurious, the faint scent of fresh flowers replacing the smell of antiseptic common in public hospitals. Nurses in immaculate uniforms greeted them immediately, guiding the stretcher to an exclusive wing. But the efficiency of Arthur's world collided with Leah's emotional reality when a doctor approached. "Mr. Sterling, we're taking him to pediatrics for some tests. The young lady can wait here." The word separation was the trigger. "No," Leah screamed again, clinging to the stretcher. "I'm not leaving him alone. I'm staying with him." The tears she had held back so forcefully finally streamed down her dirty face. Arthur saw the pure desperation in her eyes. She was the only constant in Peter's life, and vice versa. Separating them was like tearing off a limb. He intervened, his voice filled with an authority that came not from money, but from a new understanding. "She stays," he told the doctor. "Find a chair, a cot, whatever is necessary, but she does not leave his side. Understood?" The surprised doctor simply nodded. As Peter was settled into a spacious, comfortable room, Leah remained in a corner, watching every move the nurses made, her knuckles white from clenching her own clothes. Arthur sat in the armchair beside her, not knowing what to say. He, the master negotiator, was speechless. He had used his money to buy the best treatment, but he realized the most valuable currency here was comfort, and he had no idea how to offer it. A nurse approached them with a clipboard, her face professional but with a touch of kindness. "Mr. Sterling, sorry to bother you, but for the admission form, we need some information. What is the children's last name?" Arthur opened his mouth to answer, but no sound came out. He looked at Leah, then at the nurse. Last name, he had no idea. He had turned his world upside down for two children whose full names he didn't even know. The nurse continued, oblivious to his shock, and their dates of birth, names of their parents or a legal guardian. The silence that followed was heavier than any financial loss he had ever faced. He was the one responsible here, yet he knew absolutely nothing about them. The complexity of his impulsive decision hit him with full force. This gesture wasn't just about paying a hospital bill, it was about lives, and he was completely lost. The silence in the hospital room was filled only by the soft beeping of the monitors and Peter's shallow breathing. The nurse's question hung in the air, exposing the vast chasm between Arthur's life and the lives of the children he was trying to help. He was a man who knew the minute details of his financial portfolio, the ROI on every stock, the maturity date of every treasury bond, but he did not know Leah and Peter's last name. The realization of his own ignorance was crushing. He looked at Leah, who watched him with an expression he couldn't decipher. "Smith," she whispered, her voice so quiet it was almost lost. "Our name is Smith." The nurse jotted it down, satisfied to have filled a blank on her form. But for Arthur, that simple common name opened a universe of new questions. Who were the Smiths? Where were they? "And your parents?" he asked Leah, his voice as gentle as he could manage. She dropped her gaze to her own bare feet, now strangely out of place on the polished hospital floor. "Mum went on a trip," she answered, with the same rehearsed line she probably repeated to every curious stranger. "She'll be back soon." Arthur knew, with a painful certainty, that their mother wasn't coming back. He didn't press. The wound was too deep to be touched by a stranger. His doctor, Dr. Evans, a middle-aged woman with a sharp, serene gaze, entered the room. She examined Peter carefully, then turned to Arthur and beckoned him into the hallway. "He has severe pneumonia, complicated by malnutrition and dehydration," she said, pulling no punches. "He got here just in time. Another day or two in those conditions. I don't even want to think about it. We've started him on antibiotics and fluids. He's going to need to be here for a while." Arthur nodded, relief and horror warring within him. "Do whatever it takes. Cost is not an issue." Dr. Evans looked at him, her eyes seeing past the expensive suit and the billionaire's facade. "The money is the easy part, Arthur," she said, with a frankness few dared to use with him. "The problem is what happens next. They have nowhere to go, do they? The rhetorical question hit home. He had solved the immediate crisis, the medical emergency. But what about after? He couldn't just return them to the alley. The responsibility he had taken on was far greater than he had imagined. He went back to the room to find Leah asleep in the armchair, her head slumped at an uncomfortable angle, but still holding her brother's hand. Seeing her like that, vulnerable in her sleep, reinforced his determination. The next day, the first waves of the tsunami he had triggered began to crash into his professional life. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. It was partners, investors, board members, all panicking over the rumors that Rick and Greg, true to their threat, had begun to spread. The gossip was poisonous and calculated. Arthur was having a nervous breakdown. He was spending company capital irresponsibly. He was involved with street people, maybe even illicit activities. His reputation, built on years of discipline and cold precision, was being systematically demolished. His secretary, Helen, an efficient and discreet woman who had worked with him for nearly a decade, called, her voice tense, "Mr. Sterling, Mr. Tanaka from the Japanese investment fund has cancelled the meeting. He said he doesn't feel comfortable negotiating with someone whose emotional stability is in question." That was a heavy blow. The Japanese deal was the biggest of his career, a project that would have cemented his billionaire status and launched him into a new stratosphere of power, and he had lost it. He looked through the glass into the hospital room, at Leah, who had just woken up and was now quietly telling a story to her drowsy brother. He had lost a deal, but what was he gaining? He didn't know yet, but he felt it was something of incalculable value, something that couldn't be measured in dollars or yen. That afternoon, while Leah was distracted with some soup a nurse had brought, Arthur received an unexpected visitor at the hospital. Helen. She stood at the doorway, her professional gaze wavering as she took in the scene. I came to bring some documents for you to sign," she said, the excuse flimsy. "But I think I really came to see for myself." She looked at the children, then at him. "What they're saying at the office, it's horrible. But seeing this," she gestured toward the room, "it doesn't look like the picture they're painting." Arthur saw in her eyes not condemnation, but a spark of understanding. "It's complicated, Helen." "Mr. Sterling," she began, her voice firm, "I've worked for you for 10 years. I know the man you are in business. But maybe this is who you really are. If you need an ally, you have one." In that moment, amidst the chaos of his life falling apart, Arthur was no longer alone. He had a kind nurse, an honest doctor, and now a loyal secretary. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He smiled at Helen, a genuine smile, the first in a long time. But his peace was short-lived. His phone rang again. It was his bank manager. "Arthur, I'm sorry to bother you, but Rick and Greg have invoked the partnership's emergency dissolution clause. They're liquidating assets and freezing your personal accounts linked to the company. They claim you represent a risk to the group's equity." The floor seemed to vanish from under his feet. They weren't just spreading rumors, they were cutting off his cash flow, his source of power. The war had become real, and he was about to fight it without his primary weapons. The call from the bank manager was like a punch to the solar plexus. Arthur felt the air rush out of him, a cold sense of panic creeping up his spine. He, who moved millions with a simple voice command, now had his accounts frozen. Rick and Greg weren't bluffing. They were using the very system Arthur had helped build to strangle him financially. The irony was brutal. He stepped away from the room so Leah wouldn't see him, walking to a window at the end of the hall that overlooked the city. The skyscrapers that once represented his playground, his kingdom of power and profit, now looked like monuments to a past life. "How far can they take this?" Arthur asked the manager, his voice tight. "Legally, they can paralyze all shared assets until the dissolution is audited. That could take weeks, maybe months, and they're contesting your personal holdings." claiming they were purchased with partnership capital. It's a mess, Arthur. They're trying to break you. He hung up, his mind spinning. The fortune he had considered inexhaustible was suddenly out of reach. He still had assets, private crypto holdings, gold in vaults, but his liquid capital, the cash that kept his empire running and paid for bills like this exorbitant hospital stay, was locked down. His first reaction was fury. He wanted to call his lawyers, to start an all-out war. But then he glanced back at the door to the room where 2 lives depended on him. A legal war would be long, expensive, and above all, a distraction. And he couldn't afford to be distracted. He needed focus, a plan. Helen, who was still there, had witnessed the conversation in silence. "What are you going to do?" she asked, genuine concern in her voice. "I'm going to fight," he answered, "but not on their battlefield. They want me to despair over the money, but my priority is different now." He took a deep breath, organizing his thoughts as he would before a major negotiation. "Helen, I need you. Call my real estate broker. List the penthouse, and the sports car, and the yacht. I need liquidity. Now, transfer the funds to my private account, the one they can't touch." Helen stared at him, shocked. "You're selling everything." "I'm selling what doesn't matter," he corrected her, "to protect what does." The decision, which should have been agonizing, brought with it a strange sense of lightness. Those symbols of wealth, which he had worked so hard to acquire, suddenly felt like dead weight. In the following days, the hospital became his headquarters. On one hand, he monitored Peter's slow but steady improvement. The boy's fever was gone, and he was starting to regain some color. Leah, sensing the change, slowly began to relax. She even smiled at Arthur when he brought her a coloring book and a set of pencils. It was a small, shy smile, but to him, it was worth more than any dividend. On the other hand, he managed the dismantling of his old life. Over the phone, with Helen's help, he sold his assets one by one, often for less than they were worth in exchange for speed. Each sale was a small death of his former self, but also a step toward something new. His old friends and colleagues from the city's elite treated him like a pariah. The doors to exclusive clubs were closed. Invitations to events were rescinded. When he had to go to his old office to collect personal documents, he was met with cold stares and malicious whispers. Some employees, loyal to Rick and Greg, treated him with veiled contempt. It was humiliating. He, who had been king of that domain, was now treated like a leper. But amid this rejection, something unexpected happened. He began to notice the people he'd never truly seen before. The doorman who always wished him a good morning, the cleaning lady who smiled at him, the young man from the coffee cart who knew his order by heart. It was they who now greeted him with sincere kindness, as if they saw beyond the gossip and recognized the man. His one ally at the office, Helen, became his rock. She worked for him in secret, feeding him information, organizing his new financial life, and most importantly, offering unwavering moral support. "They think they're punishing you," she said one day, handing him a statement for his private account, now flush with cash from his liquidated assets. "But they don't get it. They can't see." She was right. They couldn't see the transformation. They couldn't see that as his financial net worth shrank. His inner wealth grew. One afternoon, as he watched Leah teach Peter how to draw, Arthur's phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Arthur Sterling?" a hesitant female voice asked. "My name is Claire. I'm your neighbor from the apartment next door." "Well, your old apartment. I just wanted to say, what you're doing, it's brave. Most of the people in this building, with all their money, wouldn't have an ounce of your decency." The call was short, but the impact was immense. Amidst so much scorn, a voice of support. A stranger, maybe, he thought. He wasn't as alone as he imagined, but the battle was far from over. That evening, Dr. Evans called him aside. "Peter is improving, but the tests revealed a congenital heart defect, likely aggravated by the pneumonia. He's going to need surgery. It's delicate and very expensive." The news landed like a bomb. Just when he thought he was winning, a new obstacle, larger and more frightening, appeared on the horizon. The surgery would cost nearly everything he had managed to raise from selling his assets. He would have to choose a young boy's life or the last remnant of his former fortune. Dr. Evans's words, heart defect, delicate surgery, very expensive, formed a cold knot in Arthur's stomach. He, who once measured risk in market percentages and life in quarterly earnings reports, was now faced with an equation that defied all his logic. The cost of the surgery wasn't just a number, it was the end of his net worth, the annihilation of his former self. It was the sum he had set aside as his safety net, his capital to start over, the last inheritance from his life as a business titan. To spend it meant leaping off a cliff without a parachute, betting everything not on a promising stock, but on the fragile beat of a small heart. He walked back to the room like an automaton. Leah was sitting on the edge of Peter's bed, reading to him in a low voice from a book a nurse had given them. The scene was so serene, so full of a simple, pure love, that it contrasted violently with the storm raging inside him. The world of Rick and Greg, with its relentless pursuit of one more million, one more yacht, one more status trophy, suddenly seemed pathetic and distant. "He's going to get better soon." "Right?" Leah asked, looking up at Arthur. There was a trust in her he didn't deserve, a faith he himself had shattered days ago with a fake credit card. Her question wasn't about money or complex surgeries, it was about hope. And he realized that, in that moment, he was the guardian of that hope. The choice ceased to be a choice. It was an obligation, the only honorable action left to him. He could lose all his money, but he couldn't bear the thought of watching the light in those eyes go out again. The instant his decision solidified in his soul, his phone buzzed with a sinister urgency. It was Helen. Her voice, normally calm and controlled, was choked, on the verge of tears. "Mr. Sterling, they did it," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Rick and Greg, they leaked confidential information about your renewable energy fund, the project that was your dream, your chance to build something of value." Arthur felt the floor give way. That fund was his only major investment outside the partnership, his bet on a better future, the proof that he could use his capital to create, not just accumulate. "All the primary investors pulled their support this morning," Helen continued, sobbing softly. "The fund has collapsed. Your personal investment, everything you had in it, it's gone, wiped out." It was the killing blow. That money was his last fortress, the final piece of his empire. They hadn't just isolated him, they had actively hunted him down and destroyed him, for pure revenge. They wanted to teach him a lesson, to show him that no one leaves the pack unpunished. The message was clear. Without them, he was nothing. The ruin was total. For a moment, darkness enveloped him. The anger, the despair, the humiliation. They had won. He was broken. But then, he heard Peter's faint laugh, reacting to something Leah had said. The sound, so fragile and so precious, cut through the darkness like a lighthouse beam. They could take his money, his businesses, his reputation, but they couldn't touch that. They couldn't touch what truly mattered. With a calmness he never imagined he possessed, he ended the call with Helen. He walked out of the room, found Dr. Evans in the hallway, and looked her in the eye. "Doctor," he said, his voice firm and clear, "schedule Peter's surgery for the earliest possible date. I am authorizing full payment in advance." He no longer had a fortune. He barely had enough. But he had a purpose. And for the first time in his life, he felt truly rich. He just didn't know that by saving Peter's life, he had just signed the final death warrant for his own financial freedom. The hospital bill was only the beginning of his fall. Peter's surgery was a success. Dr. Evans's words sounded like the sweetest melody to Arthur's ears. For the first time in weeks, he felt a wave of genuine relief, a sense that despite all the chaos and loss, he had done the right thing. He watched from the hallway as Leah, sitting beside her brother's bed, showed him the colors in her drawing book, her face lit with a fragile but radiant joy. Peter, still weak, smiled, a ghost of the smile that would one day be full again. In that moment, the loss of his empire, the betrayal of his friends, the rejection of his social class, it all seemed small and insignificant. He had traded his fortune for a boy's life, and looking at that scene, he felt like the richest man in the world. But peace is a precious commodity, and for Arthur, it proved to be terrifyingly fleeting. It started with a cough from Leah. At first, he paid it no mind, but the cough persisted, becoming dry and weary. The next day, she was pale, with dark circles under her eyes. She complained of being cold, even in the heated room. Dr. Evans examined her, her serene expression giving way to growing concern. Hours later, the diagnosis fell on Arthur like an avalanche. Leah had contracted an aggressive, hospital-acquired infection, a rare, resistant strain that was rapidly attacking her lungs. Her immune system, already weakened by months of malnutrition and stress, couldn't fight it. "And the medication we have here isn't working," the doctor said, her voice grave. "There's an experimental treatment, but it's only available at a specialized research center in another state. We would need to transfer her immediately on a fully equipped medical flight. Time is crucial." The cost she quoted next made Arthur's blood run cold. It was an astronomical sum. It was, by a cruel coincidence, almost exactly what he had left in his private account. The very last remnant from the dismantling of his life. It was the money for Peter's recovery, for finding them a place to live, for starting over from absolute zero. As he absorbed the blow, his phone rang. It was Helen, her voice excited for the first time in weeks. "Mr. Sterling, I found it. It's a miracle. An old contact of mine, who doesn't know your situation, told me about a tech startup. The founder passed away, and the heirs are selling his stake for a fraction of its real value just to be rid of it. It's a gamble, but the technology is revolutionary. If you invest now, with the capital you still have, you could not only recover, but build something even bigger. This is your chance, but they need an answer within the hour." The world stood still. Arthur stood frozen in the middle of the hallway, the phone in one hand, the cost estimate for the medical flight in the other. Before him, two paths opened, clear and terrible. One led back to his world, the chance to reclaim his fortune, his power, to rub victory in the faces of Rick and Greg. The other led into the unknown, to total financial ruin, to abject poverty. He looked through the glass. Leah was now in a separate bed, an oxygen tube in her nose, her chest rising and falling with difficulty. She looked so small, so helpless. The girl who only wanted a bottle of milk. The girl who had taught him the meaning of the word, important. He thought of his former self, who wouldn't have hesitated for a second to seize the business opportunity, treating the child as an unfortunate liability. But he was no longer that man. The choice that should have been the most difficult of his life was, in fact, no choice at all. He ended Helen's call without a word. He walked slowly to the pediatric wing's front desk, where Dr. Evans was waiting with the transfer forms in hand. His phone rang again. The name of the startup's investor glowed on the screen, the promise of a golden future flashing at him. He silenced the device and put it in his pocket, turning his back on the final temptation. He took the pen the doctor offered him. His hand did not tremble. He looked at the dotted line that represented the annihilation of everything he had once been, and at the same time, the affirmation of everything he had become. He began to sign his name. The moment Arthur's pen slid across the paper, authorizing Leah's transfer and consequently zeroing out his bank account, a profound silence settled in his soul. There was no regret, no panic, just the strange calm that follows a devastating storm when everything has been destroyed and there is nothing left to lose. What remained was the essence, the bare framework of his new self. He had chosen, and in doing so, he found a freedom that no fortune had ever given him. The following days were a blur of anxiety and hope. Leah was transferred, and Arthur, with no money to accompany her, remained at the hospital with Peter, receiving updates by phone from the medical team. Each call was an emotional roller coaster. The infection isn't responding as we'd hoped. There was a slight improvement overnight. Her lungs are under immense stress. During this torturous wait, the reality of his new situation hit him in a practical way. The hospital, aware that the final payment had been made, began to press him about Peter's discharge. He had nowhere to take him. He no longer had an apartment, no money to rent one. He was, for all intents and purposes, homeless with temporary custody of a recovering child. It was Helen who, once again, proved to be his anchor. She showed up at the hospital one afternoon, her face determined. "I have a small apartment I inherited from my parents," she said matter-of-factly. "It's empty. It's in a simple neighborhood, but it's clean and safe. Stay there as long as you need. I won't take no for an answer." Her generosity, so simple and so profound, left Arthur speechless. He, who had once measured loyalty in bonuses and percentages, was now sustained by the kindness of a woman he barely knew personally. When Peter was finally discharged, Arthur took him to Helen's small apartment. It was a world away from his old penthouse. Instead of floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the city, there was a single window overlooking a brick courtyard. Instead of Italian marble, the floor was worn hardwood. But there, as he prepared a simple meal for Peter in the small kitchen, Arthur felt more at home than he ever had in his glass palace. A week later, the phone call he had both dreaded and hoped for arrived. It was Leah's doctor. "Mr. Sterling," she began, and the pause that followed was the longest of Arthur's life. "The treatment worked. The infection has subsided. She's weak, but she's out of danger. She's going to be okay." Arthur collapsed into a chair. The relief, so overwhelming, it left him weak. The tears he had held back for so long finally came, silent and hot. He cried for Leah's life, for Peter's second chance, and for the death of his former self, a grief that was also a celebration. The children's recovery marked the beginning of a new phase. With no money and no job prospects in his old field, his name was tarnished by Rick and Greg's smear campaign. Arthur had to reinvent himself. He began to apply his brilliant business mind in a different way. He realized there were hundreds of children like Leah and Peter, lost in the cracks of the system. His expertise in optimizing processes and securing investment could be applied to create something meaningful. With Helen's help, who quit her job to join him, he started sketching out a project, not a company to generate profit, but an organization to generate hope. News of his fall from grace and his new mission began to spread in unexpected circles. The neighbor who had called him Claire was a journalist. Intrigued, she investigated the story, uncovered the cruel bet, and published a moving article that went viral. The narrative wasn't about a billionaire who lost everything, but about a man who found his humanity. The article caught the attention of social impact investors, people who sought not just returns, but impact. One of them, a respected older businessman who had long been wary of Rick and Greg's ethics, sought Arthur out. "I read about what you did," the man said, "and I've read about what they did to you. The business world needs more men like the one you've become, and fewer like them. I want to invest in your organization." The seed money was enough to rent a small office and hire a team. The non-profit named The Milk of Hope was born. His first victory was legal, With the help of pro bono lawyers, he obtained official guardianship of Leah and Peter Smith. The day they walked out of the courthouse with the papers that made them a family, Arthur felt he had finally closed the most important deal of his life. The wealth he now possessed couldn't be kept in a bank, but it was right there, holding his hands, one on each side. 4 weeks. Only 4 weeks had passed since that sunny afternoon on the rooftop, the day of the cruel bet that imploded one universe and gave birth to another. To Arthur, it felt like a lifetime. The man who toasted profits with frivolous friends was now a ghost, a distant memory of someone he barely recognized. The new Arthur wore simple clothes, drove a second-hand car, and lived in a modest apartment, but his gaze held a depth and peace the billionaire before had never known. The milk of hope grew by the day. The story of Arthur, Leah, and Peter became a powerful symbol. Donations started to pour in, not just from large investors, but from ordinary people touched by the narrative of transformation. Volunteers offered their time and talent. The organization, built on the foundation of Arthur's business acumen, was efficient and focused, using every dollar to create safe shelters and support programs for homeless children. He had found his true calling, using his skills not to accumulate capital, but to distribute dignity. One afternoon, while organizing spreadsheets in the small NGO office, Helen came in with an envelope. "This arrived for you," she said with an enigmatic smile. Inside was an invitation to the annual Chamber of Commerce Gala, the most important social event on the city's business calendar. His first impulse was to throw it away. That world had spit him out. But then he saw the names of the hosts, Rick and Greg, who had assumed full control of his old company. He looked at the photo of Leah and Peter he kept on his desk, and he decided to go. When Arthur walked into the ballroom, an awkward silence spread. Everyone there knew his story. Some looked at him with pity, others with contempt, but many, especially after Claire's article, regarded him with a reluctant respect. He wasn't wearing a designer suit, but his posture was more imposing than ever. Rick and Greg saw him and strode in his direction, their forced smiles barely hiding their anger. "Well, look who it is," Rick sneered. "Come to beg for scraps for your little charity." Arthur smiled, a genuine, disarming smile. "No, I came to thank you," he said. The answer caught them completely off guard. "Thank us," Greg stammered. "Yes, I want to thank you. If it weren't for your stupid bet, I'd still be up on that rooftop. As empty and lost as you are now, you took everything from me, and in doing so, you gave me the world." He turned and left them there, speechless and defeated, in the middle of their own ballroom. In that moment, everyone in the room understood who the real winner was. Later that night, Arthur returned home. The apartment lights were on. As he opened the door, the smell of chocolate cake enveloped him. In the small living room, Leah and Peter, now healthy and vibrant, ran to hug him. A slightly lopsided cake with lit candles sat on the coffee table. "It's our 1-month family anniversary," Leah announced proudly. Arthur knelt and hugged them tightly, his heart overflowing with a kind of wealth that couldn't be quoted on the stock exchange. He looked at his children's happy faces and understood the final lesson. The girl who chose only milk when offered the world wasn't asking for too little. She was asking for everything that mattered. And the businessman who lost a fortune to honor that choice discovered that the greatest investment he ever made wasn't in stocks, crypto, or gold, but in the future of 2 children. The street that had been the stage for a planned humiliation had become the birthplace of a family, proving that sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself. And in the simplicity of that apartment, with his children's love as his greatest dividend, Arthur Sterling finally felt like a true billionaire.